Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Action webinar series. I wanted to welcome everyone to this webinar series and introduce myself. My name is Elvira Trulla. I'm the Communications Manager and Web Producer for Girls Action. And in a couple of minutes, I will be introducing today's presenters, Natalie Lozano-Neira and Waridi Mirena Muhungi, who will be sharing their experiences and insights around doing social justice work. I want to thank Natalie and Waridi for accepting to present a webinar as co-authors of the new publication, Decolonizing Social Justice Work, Stories to Support Organizations, Facilitators, and Youth Working Against Oppression. So if you've already participated in a Girls Action webinar, welcome back. And for those joining us for the first time, I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to introduce Girls Action Foundation and go over the format for today's webinar. So very quickly, Girls Action Foundation is a national nonprofit that works to empower girls. We are based in Montreal, where we run local girls programs, and we work with some 300 partners who run local girls programs in their communities across Canada. And our activities include leadership training, networking events, and various other projects for girls, young women, and girls programmers. So through our collective and collaborative work, we reach about 60,000 girls and young women located in northern, rural, and urban communities across the country. So before introducing and passing things on to Natalie and Waridi, I wanted to go over the process for today's webinar. So you'll see the agenda on your screens, and also on your screens you'll see a number of slides that will be changing throughout the presentation. There's also a series of information panels on the right-hand side of your screen, and each panel has an icon associated with it. You should be able to see the chat panel open on your screen, and this is what I would invite you to use to communicate with me during the webinar if you have technical issues, for example, and I'll do my best to troubleshoot. So to send me a message, please select my name from the drop-down menu and press send. You'll also see, or you should also see, a Q&A panel. It's the one with the question mark beside it. And I would invite you to use this panel to send me your questions about the presentation. And I also invite you to start sending the questions whenever you choose and whenever you have something burning that you'd like to ask. And as the moderator of the Q&A, I'll read out your questions to Natalie and Waridi when the Q&A session begins, right after their presentation. And as a final note, I did want to mention that we are recording today's session, and when the session is over, we will be making the webinar podcast available online, and that'll actually be in the next couple of weeks. So everyone should receive an email in their inbox. So with that covered, I am really happy to be able to introduce very briefly, as per their request, Natalie and Waridi today's session. And Natalie currently works on a program for newcomer youth at Immigrant Services Society of British Columbia, based in Vancouver. She is a member of Girls Action Foundation's National Network. Waridi is a community organizer, popular educator, and Girls Action Foundation's interconnector in the Greater Toronto area. Both are part of an 8-person collective who co-authored the publication Decolonizing Social Justice Work. So with that, I'd like to welcome both Natalie and Waridi. Over to you. I'm going to also give you, Waridi, the power to go through the presentation, the PowerPoint.
Okay. Thank you. Greetings all. It's so strange to be speaking without feeling that energy by voice, but we'll go with it and explore it. Hope we could just have a positive journey experience right now. It was our request, by the way, to have a really short bio, not to actually even had a bio. I think both of us were kind of like, no, we don't really need one. But so my name is Waridi Mirena Muhungi. I'm from lots of parts of the world, but I'm from Kenya originally. I've been doing different types of feminist popular educator work in different settings, and my perspective comes very much from an African global perspective. I'm a working class single mother, and I've been working with a variety of communities in relation to, what we would say or see as social justice, quote unquote, in different spaces, including NGO spaces, for a few years now. No, that's it. I'll keep it short and sweet.
Okay.
And so, Natalie.
Thank you, Wari. So my name is Natalie Lozano Neira, and I came to Canada as a refugee from Colombia about 11 years ago with my parents, and ever since I came, I've been as involved with working with immigrant refugee communities. Back when I was younger as a participant, and now more as a bit of an organizer and youth worker. So I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of really great youth from all over the world, and to work on different initiatives with them. And I'm currently attending SFU, Simon Fraser University, and I'm doing my master's on refugee policy in Canada and how it affects or what effects it has on women and queer refugee communities. So yeah, that's me, and I've been involved with Girls Action for a few years now, and I've met some really amazing people. Pretty much some of the people that are in the all of the people in the publication, and some more. So I was that has been the space where we were able to talk about some of these things that maybe I didn't get a chance to talk to back in the work that I was doing here in Vancouver. So I'm gonna keep it at that too. And do I have the power, Elvira, to change?
So just to finalize, so we go ahead, Natalie.
Yeah, sorry. We just really wanted to mention that. So we know we're speaking in this format, and we feel a little bit. Well, it's interesting, this format where we are not able to hear you or to know if you're listening to us, or what energy it's coming from this I guess it's not really a conversation, a presentation. But we really just wanted to mention that we're not experts, that we just wrote a publication based on our own experiences and what we felt were points that we had in common, but we are holding a master's or going to school or doing whatever work that we do. We're only experts in our own stories. That's about the only thing we might be experts on. And the other thing that we wanted to mention is that this book was written as a collective, and so as you can see, there is only two of us here doing this presentation, and so it's only bringing out the perspectives of the two of us, and we don't claim to try to be speaking on behalf of all of the authors of the book, just the two of us.
Thanks for that, Natalie.
Yeah.
And the ball is in your court. You'll see the green and blue ball beside your name.
Great. Okay, so we wanted to go a little bit about over the why. Why did we do this? And so there were many years, a lot of us involved in the publication have been involved with Girls Action for a really long time, some a lot longer than me, for example. And so since I started coming, I remember, as always, at the retreats, caucusing around Indigenous and racialized girls, and it was very ad hoc. It wasn't planned. It always ended up being over our break periods or lunchtime or dinner time, because we really found a need to speak to each other without having to explain ourselves and justify our experiences. So this has a little bit of that background, this publication, and so we also wanted to recognize that there were many women that have pushed for spaces such as this, where racialized, queer, and Indigenous women can come together to write out a publication like Decolonizing Social Justice. It's been, so not all of the women who have been pushing for these spaces were part of this publication. So we wanted to make that acknowledgement too, that it's not just our efforts, the only efforts that have led to this publication, but there is a history that goes beyond us, and there's been a lot of efforts by many other women across. And so, as I mentioned, these came out of a little bit out of frustration, a little bit out of celebration, and the frustration had to do with us having to explain every year at every retreat, not to everybody, but to some participants, what colonization was, that yes, it still existed, and how racism still existed, and yes, and having to give examples about how we faced it on a daily basis. So we wanted to put something out there just to go over that a little bit more. We were pretty much tired of people invalidating our experiences as all of the multiple identities that were there in the group. So, Wari, did I miss something?
No, it's good. It's good. So that's a bit on the why, and the how. Natalie kind of summed it up a bit, but so some of us found ourselves in this Girls Action space, and we were invited by Girls Action to do a publication, or to kind of have this train the trainer tool in regards to best practices and working with different communities, including what folks would say as immigrant newcomer, although we're all immigrants unless you're indigenous to this land, but that's also another conversation to have, racialized, queer, etc. So there's these different these different themes that Girls Action had invited us to come together. And then so we came to a space and we had this room, and we realized that there was much anger, much frustration, and that there's a lot of said within organizations like Girls Action and others that are always focusing on best practices, and our thing was like, no, what went wrong? What were the worst practices? And how do some of these spaces we work in perpetuate the very things that we're trying to fight against? And while this is nothing new, we found that there's a lot of communities that share, including yourselves, I'm pretty sure, the similar frustration. However, we found like there was very little, written information, stories, voices that were around. So we out of basically anger and frustration of what we had experienced, we came together, and without having any idea whatsoever, this publication came about. But for me to also be fully transparent, Natalie and Latoya were not even originally part of the people that were invited. They were experiencing quite some hardships and challenges in terms of in another workshop that they were. So we invited them in, and there was much resistance. And also that throughout this whole publication, it was a huge struggle. We had to fight to get it done. Girls Action was actually pretty resistant for a while, up until the very last few moments of editing. So just to be clear that it was not like a beautiful space where Girls Action invited us to produce this and was like, great, now share it with the world. It was us who basically reclaimed that space and said, no, we think it's more valuable for us to do this. And then after going back and forth, we finally were able to push for it. And also just like to name two of our allies within Girls Action that really made this happen, which is Janine and Fabienne. I won't speak further on them, but then we definitely had people that were there to support us. However, it was a struggle till the very end. And I'm saying this because it could invite us to think about how even within those spaces that are there to support us, or supposed to be there to support us as an organization, or an NGO, often when we're challenging what things happen structurally and internally, there's such resistance in terms of just the reality of the oppression that's taking space within the organization internally. So then we just started to talk about the injustice that we've been facing or experienced or seen or been a part of. And so some of the stories are not just talking about us being on the other end, but also the moments where we felt uncomfortable in our work because there was something wrong at what we were doing. So that's the how. And the who, we're just going to name the names just in honor of having their spirits with us today, because it wouldn't happen if they weren't here. So this is Nisha was a part of this, Nisha Sajnani, sorry I just tortured her name, Jessica Yee, Keitha Mercer, Kat Butler, Latoya Jones, and Melanie Maitling. And so these were the other spirits that were involved in this project. Natalie?
Thank you, Wari. And so in the book, thank you for that. I think especially in the how, I just wanted to also echo what Wari said, because I think it's important for us to be critical of all spaces and of all people. So I think we should be self-critical, and we shouldn't, there is sometimes the danger in social justice work, whatever that means, to say that, to think that you're a little bit better than other people, or to get to a point where you're like, oh, but I know all of these things. And there is always room to change things, because all these layers of oppression are across in every system that we access. And so yeah, that I guess the book is very much founded on just our experiences with different systems, and how at times they've been supported, and at times they've been oppressive. And so yeah, just wanted to reinforce that. So for the terminology that we used in the book, we have a couple of terms that are commonly used, but rarely we take the time to actually define what they mean, and it's in the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to read out the definitions that we use, but we did use social justice, colonialism, and decolonization quite a bit throughout the publication. And so we know that there are different understandings for these terms, but these were the terminology. This was the terminology that we use, the definitions that we use as a common ground for all of us to work. And in the publication, you'll see that there is more of an extended analysis of all of these terms. So this is very brief, what you see in the PowerPoint. So hopefully you can read up a little bit more once you see the publication.
And yes, and there's also two other terms that were used just to add that we didn't include in the PowerPoint, which is the NGO-industrial complex, as well as white supremacy, which we also explain in our own ways, and being inspired by other people as well, of what we mean by that. Before, the points of unity is actually what is the root and the backbone of how it all started, because when I actually go back to it, this is the first things that we wrote together as a collective on maybe like 100 pieces of flip chart paper on the floor, etc. So shared responsibility, I'm going to explain them rather than read through them. Is basically what we meant by learning from each other and being accountable, and that's within whatever space you are in, and also the role in terms of the hierarchy that or should I say the hierarchy or the power relations that you identify or engage in the work that you do. Shared authority was really looking at how do we use our privilege in a way that is constructive and fruitful for the quote-unquote struggle. Intersectionality is everything that intersects in the middle in terms of multiple identities, and storytelling and story listening. And so this is kind of going against the whole format of this webinar, where we really, if you know, part of this creation was really through storytelling. Literally, one of us, each of us, going in popcorn style around, taking our turns to share our experiences. And so there was some tears and some yelling and some anger and some leaving out the room and some laughing and all these things. And so this is basically what brought us together. And we would hope that maybe a different format to do this is so we could also hear your stories or your feedback and just get this kind of collective vibe and energy of where you're all coming from as well. And circular cycles, which is just the idea of life is not linear. I don't need to go into further detail. And expressive change. So that's basically how could we basically walk the talk and talk the walk. What I'd like to, if we go on the next slide, how I'd like to summarize what we mean by that is through Warren's words, what he says, how can we become what we seek? So we go further in that, obviously in the publication. I was just to give more background of the energies and our perspectives that were coming through these stories.
Thank you.
So Natalie.
So, and I also wanted to mention that thank you people who are writing in the chat, because it's weird to speak to people and not know if they're responding. So I was kind of asking if people were falling asleep. So thank you for for those of you who have answers saying no, I'm not falling asleep. We're listening. So thank you, Wari, for that. And so part of the section that I wrote on this publication was a section on youth engagement. And I was speaking as a youth who's accessed many services throughout the years, but also as in the role of youth worker. So it was I really tried to go a little bit over the stories when I started going to as a participant to different programs, and I became a bit more articulate, quote unquote. My English improved a little bit more, and I was able to speak out on the challenges that immigrant refugee youth were facing, and the programs that I accessed as a participant started taking me to all of these conferences and presentations as if A, I could speak on behalf of all immigrant refugee youth, and B, as if my experience was universal, but also as if people really got to understand my story. So I often got the 5 or 10 minutes that usually youth get in a 2-hour, 3-hour presentation. And so I often walked out of there thinking that people felt that it was I was here as a refugee, and I should be thankful, and I shouldn't really be criticizing the systems here, and also that that I left as a refugee from Colombia because of my own people, so that my people were savages or violent inherently. And so I always had that feeling at the end. It was never explicitly said out loud, but through the questions that I got asked at the end of my presentations, I always felt like 10 minutes wasn't enough to really explain what was happening. And so I always got caught at the point of like, and then I came to Canada, and then everybody felt really great about being a part of the Canadian system because it had brought me to Canada. And in ways, I am thankful that I was able to get out of Colombia alive. But in other ways, I don't feel that should be a reason not to criticize the systems that because I'm living here now, and this is and to not and. So yeah, and so there is lots of learnings that me as a refugee coming to another country have to do. So I never got a chance to explore the intersections with, for example, Indigenous people here in this land and my own connections to Indigenous people back home. And so it's I guess a web of layers that obviously in a short presentation you're never able to explore, but never mind when you're the talking youth at the conference and you get 5 to 10 minutes maximum to speak and where you feel a little bit of that pressure of I need to make my youth worker who brought me here look good, and so I need to speak a little bit about the program. And it might be a good program, but there might be things that you might want to give feedback on, but you as a youth, I certainly felt that pressure. Even as a youth worker, I now sometimes feel that pressure of not being able to really speak the reality of what's happening, not to affect the program or the organization that I'm representing. So that was kind of my story, and the reason that led me to write the points that I wrote. And so I was really hoping that this section could encourage some of the youth that are accessing different services and are organizing, not only accessing, because youth not only access services, but also provide a lot of support for their peers and are able to give back in ways that no youth worker and no organization could ever do. So for these youth to have a little bit of a feel a little bit of an authority to speak back, and that came also as in my role as a youth worker, where I saw some of the youth that were participating in the programs that I was running not being a little bit fearful or afraid of speaking back to me and saying, when I was screwing up, saying, Natalie, that's not cool, or this is where you're not doing things great, because they felt they will insult me, or they felt that, you know, they care about me, so they didn't want to hurt me. So for youth workers also, for us to start thinking about ways to open up spaces so that youth can, so maybe it can be a more organized process where youth can come back and tell you, so there is that space where they can come and tell you where things are not working well, or where things need to change or need to improve. And part of this was also a little bit of my experience with an amazing group that I am part of, which is the Action Team that was created out of a program that I participated in and then I worked for. And it's a totally grassroots, self-led program. And so there were, once immigrant refugee youth started organizing in this program, they started questioning a lot of the things, or some of the things that were happening within the program that they graduated from. And so asking things about where the budget was going and how it was being used, and the process and the direction and the vision of the program, which I think is ideal. I think, but it was met with a lot of resistance from the organization and at times from the program too. So in my head, that's ideal, where youth actually get to know and have an influence into the direction, how it's happening, budgets, what kind of people are being hired, because in the end, it's going to be them who are going to be working with or impacted by the decisions that happen in the program. So yeah, and then at the end of my piece, I also talk a little bit about our own responsibilities as youth. And you'll see that I talk sometimes the youth work and sometimes the youth, because I think I'm still under the youth age, but I also recognize I don't have the same challenges that, or I don't have the same experiences that many youth have. I have a full-time stable job, and I finished school, and so it's much different for me. But sometimes I'm still the youth in the room, so I go back and forth with that identity. And so with that, also for us to recognize our own responsibilities and our privileges and be open to learn from our peers, because I think sometimes when we start deconstructing colonization and discrimination and racism, we forget we are really good sometimes at being able to point out and highlight where those things are happening to us, but not so much where we are doing those things to other people. And so, yeah, just being able to have very open conversations with your peers about what being an ally to each other's identities and struggles is like. And so that was where my story focused, and hopefully, I got some feedback this week. Some of the youth from the program read the story, and they said they liked the simple language that was used in the in my section, because it was easier to read. And they said it's not that we can't read the other stuff, it's just that it takes less of an effort to read this part. And so I liked it, and I hope they liked it. It seems like they liked it, and I keep asking for feedback to see if we can fix it, and so we'll see what happens in the upcoming weeks as more of the youth that I work with read it.
Thank you.
Great.
So I think I have two stories, yeah, and so I'll focus on one. There's lots of overlap in some of our experiences as well, and so my other story is called Identity for Sale, Anyone, NGOs, and just by the title, you will probably guess that it has a lot of similarities with what Natalie is referring to, although I'm coming from a very different experience as well. The story that I will focus maybe just 3-4 minutes due to time on right now would be the one that was for facilitators and program coordinators. And it's called Attention Passengers, There's Some Turbulence Ahead. And that basically, in short, as a facilitator or coordinator, I was speaking from my frustration and intrigue and confusion and re-traumatization of an experience where we were facilitating a workshop on multiple things, documented versus undocumented in terms of immigration and law and policy, identity with racialized queer folks, etc. So there was lots of tricky, very heavy themes that were that stemmed out of a working session that I had with 2 other facilitators. And so part of it was also a critique that even if I do consider myself a positive facilitator, I still have so much room to grow, and it was also me being self-reflexive and thinking, okay, what did I do wrong, and how could I do things better? And there was not enough of while people were sharing their stories, a lot of tension. There was a lot of tension and oppressive, energy from different people's comments, and it was very tricky to be able to navigate the situation in a way where people can still feel heard but also express themselves, where at the same time stop in a moment and name it when exploitation takes place. And so after, I think it was like it was a really long afternoon, and me feeling completely swamped, de-energized, and overwhelmed, I started to look back and think about, okay, so maybe there's a moment where I could have created a space, knowing that spaces cannot be safe for everybody at the same time. So even if we all hold a certain amount of responsibility in facilitating, and when we say facilitate, I think I was coming close, not just from facilitating, okay, I'm facilitating a workshop or I'm teaching as an educator, etc., but just like facilitate life, more of that popular education approach stance. And so I was looking back and thinking, what can I do? And so this woman that really inspires me a lot and has definitely been my, you know, kind of my facilitator guru and center, had mentioned this very simple phrase, which is, attention passengers, there's some turbulence ahead. And something clicked, and I thought, why not, if we were really able to come to Interspace and give the room an idea that there's going to be tension and there's going to be anger in a way that is not just saying, okay, let's do group agreements or let's do things like that, but just what's a way that we could influence a space and the people in that space and say there will be some tension, and let's find a way to hold that space together. And so my intention today was mostly to pose questions instead of really focusing on my stories. And so I have noted some of them down here. And so some of them were, are group agreements or village rules enough to address, you know, to get emotional consent? Or how is my story as a person who's facilitating a space affecting other people's stories, and what's the historical context of my story and people's and the other people, participants, that I don't really like using that word sometimes, stories, and how could we basically locate ourselves, but also really be aware that there's going to be automatically some damage, and instead of avoiding the conflict, like how do we move into the conflict in a way that could be more constructive than deconstructive? And another question too was, as facilitators, how can we share knowledge and facilitate learning in life without re-traumatizing those that are often already exploited and oppressed? And I think that's a big, big question that I'm still struggling and trying to understand today, where, you know, it's very sad, I think, and when we move into a space and it's the same people that are often oppressed and exploited outside of this space that we're trying to create here together in the social justice work that we do, that get re-traumatized by the same people who are supposed to be there to support them. And so that's why I'm really starting to question if some of the approaches that organizations have in their work is really fruitful in a sustainable growth way rather than a quick fix or that type of bandit approach. And so anyway, in the story, as you will read in the book, I further explain where I'm coming from as a facilitator and some of my mistakes and some of my learnings as well, and pose a lot of questions in terms of how our identities and other people's identities and basically how our stories are influenced by all. Which is very much connected to, and I'll finish just in that last slide. As I said, I won't retell the story, but my question of, no, could you go back, whoever moved the slide? Thank you. Where I ask planting seeds or deepening the roots of decolonization, because one of my favorite things, and favorite, I guess in a negative way, is when oppression does take place in this social justice work realm, knowing how complex it is that often, the coordinator or the ED or somebody who has a place of power will say, oh, well, at least there was some key learning there. And I'm like, great, but to whose expense? To what expense? Why? Is it really possible, in my opinion, to really have meaningful, transformative change within these organizations and some of the spaces that we work? Yes, to a certain extent, but I'm also going to be honest in terms of my thinking. that once we're organizing within a space that's controlled by the same forces and powers outside of us, so let it be the state or foundations or board of directors, there's not that much transformation that could actually occur unless we really critically, challenge the status quo, and all of us collectively decide that we don't want that piece of pie anymore. You know, it's tasty, it's so yummy, but then it's also on a long run preventing us from really engaging in sustainable, what I would say, thinking 7 generations after and within change. So I'd like just to finish with an over-quoted organizer called Bell Hooks, who says that there must exist a paradigm, a practical model for social change that includes an understanding of ways to transform consciousness that are linked to efforts to transform structures. I'll just leave that in our minds so that we could quickly engage in the Q&A.
Thank you to both of you, and I'm just going to jump in here for a minute to acknowledge a couple of things. I hear both of you in terms of the format, that it's not your preferred format, and it feels more like a one-way conversation instead of a two-way, and it's really nice to see how many people have written in both the chat box and the Q&A box to reassure you that they're very much attentively listening to your stories and acknowledging a lot of the experiences. And I see that Natalie has been typing away at responding to some of the people who have chatted in. I just wanted to point out that some of the messages came into just the panelists, and some came into all participants. So if you allow me to maybe read out one of the messages that was written just to the panelists, which means that not everyone would have seen it, and Natalie responded to it. Or Natalie, do you prefer reading that out? It was the message from Monica to all panelists. Do you want to give that one a go?
Yes. So it says, I'm Aboriginal and my people are experiencing oppression and colonialism every day. Even as a country that calls itself free and safe, quotation marks, there was genocide against my people, an attempt to separate us from our children, land, language, and culture. Although it is not the same extreme, it is still happening. The legacy of colonization and residential schools is strong and is unfortunately being passed down generations. I feel for immigrants and refugees that face the same things in their countries and who come to a new country so far from the place they come from and are used to, removed from everything familiar. It is important that we speak to each other about our common challenges and struggles so we can work together to find solutions. I have respect for you women for being so brave to share your experiences and stories to empower others. Thank you for your work. Wari, do you want to respond, or?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I think there's nothing really to respond. I think is it from Monica? Is that correct? Yeah, you know, there's so much truth that speaks in your words, and so thank you for sharing. Basically, my response is just gratitude and appreciation, and also anger with the reality that a lot of people are experiencing.
There's a question from Amelia, who I think she would like to know how naming oppression can turn into an attack. I think she'd like you to maybe elaborate a little bit on that.
I commented. Sorry.
No, go ahead, because I was a little bit confused, so maybe you could explain.
Yeah, so I commented on that a little bit, but maybe obviously trying to hear on the phone and then trying to type, it's my strength is not typing. So what I meant to say is that sometimes it is difficult, because somebody mentioned that sometimes it's difficult or challenging to name an oppression and stop it, or like call it out. And so in my own experience, I was thinking of spaces where it might not be safe for me to call it out. So where it might be a group of guys saying something really racist or homophobic, and where do I see my role in intervening, and whether it's worth it at that moment, whether it's safe for me. So I was just thinking of like how the less privilege that you have, at least that's what I believe, the less power and privilege that you hold, the more vulnerable you are to an intervention like that turning into an attack to you, to whatever identity you might show, I guess, or you might be a part of. So that's not to say that that it's not possible to do interventions, because interventions that don't always have to be to the oppressor. It could be signs of allyship or things like that. But I have been in situations before where I have really thought about it twice, about whether I will intervene or not, because I am afraid for my own safety. And so thinking about those spaces where, like on the bus, on school, on the streets, I think that's what I was referring to, where I think the higher your privilege and your power, I think it gets a bit easier, or a bit more. There are less things to shut you down. I guess that's what I was trying to say. I don't know if that was clear.
Yeah, and just to add, I would say it all depends on context. Yeah, there's this thing that I really appreciate that that basically says we teach them how to read text, but we don't teach them how to read context. And so so I would add, like, you know, there's context on how you do it, because like even if you are, you know, you have, in terms of identity, you happen to, let's say, hold more, you know, oppression than the other person that you're trying to call out or to name, you could also have more power if you happen to be, you know, the teacher or the facilitator or whatever role that you have that gives you some type of power that's not, you know, within that situation. So for me, it's like, it's context and also choosing your battles. I think I've come from a place today where certain things I just don't fight that way anymore, because and it's not because I'm over it. You never get over it. Some people say, well, don't you just get used to shit? You know, it's like, no. But then it's just more choosing your battles in terms of where would you like to put your energy, and also how you do it. Like, because even when you do have power, you know, as an African woman, when I'm facilitating workshops, and it happens to be mostly people that come from a privileged, no dominant space, and I challenge them. It's very interesting how everything is turned out against me, and it becomes more about my identity than what I'm talking about. So sometimes I get in a situation where there is a difference when you name a moment than when you call it out, and what I mean by that is that I find it very, as a facilitator in certain spaces, when I do call somebody out, I find that there's a lot of defensiveness and not much learning. But if I do name the moment, and for me the difference is where it's like you're holding the space and you're collectively naming the moment, meaning that we are all accountable to what just happened, including the people who didn't say anything. And so then if I'm working with you know, youth or whoever, then it gets people questioning and being kind of more thinking, bring it in back on themselves rather than feeling like pointed at. But in terms of violence that would happen in the streets or in the bus, again, that's very different. There's a context, right?
Thanks for pointing out that distinction. I find that really clear, sort of the difference between naming the moment and calling it out, and I think it could be applied to so many different, even personal or collective spaces, work situations. I want to give the floor to Hannah Lynn's question. She asks, so in our work we name and practice, and in quotes, being inclusive. Do you see that as different from intersectionality? Waridi and Natalie, do either of you want to answer that question? The difference between being inclusive and intersectionality? Or if you see there as being a difference?
Oops, sorry, I was actually typing and I did a, go ahead, Natalie.
Sure. So, I guess I will start with having a bit of a discussion about what being inclusive means. I think we strive to ensure that anybody can come into our programs or be a part of whatever group. But the reality is that it is. I guess there will always be someone who isn't, whom we haven't thought of, whom we haven't, whom we aren't actively or intentionally making the space available for. I guess, at least in my opinion, because, and I guess that's where intersectionality comes in, because of the many intersectionalities. So you might have a space that is accessible for people who are on a wheelchair, for example, but not for people who have other different abilities. And so I guess that's where it gets a little bit blurry. I think intersectionality is all about people being able to define themselves for who they are and seeing where those different identities meet. And then, but then, so I also think that it is important to have intentional spaces where you welcome certain people in the community, but that those spaces should never be fixed. At least, so maybe I should clarify that too. They shouldn't always just be fixed. So there should always be conversations with participants about who is not in the room, who do we want in the room, who would be who will benefit from being in the group, and who will the group want to hear voices from. So that's not to say that having groups according to different identities is not great. I think that's awesome, but also defining a group down to just one identity sometimes could get into turbulent water, I guess, because it is not seeing how people can be a part of more than one group or identity, or how some people might not perform their identity, I guess. I don't know if I'm being too clear, and I don't know if Wari wants to add up, because she's much more articulate. I am.
I'll add just, a 2-second thing, because there's so many interesting questions that are coming up, and it would be great if we could explore them, even if it's just a little bit. But for me, inclusive, the difference between inclusive and intersectionality is not much aside from semantics and struggling with language and the English language. However, the only thing I would add is that for me, intersectionality has more of a political stance. I'll just keep it short.
And, a little bit related there, as you also observed, Waridi, there are questions coming in, and there are a couple, one from Adam James and one from Natalie Doyle, that I would like to read out and give you a chance to respond to. We do have 5 minutes left in this webinar. Would you be willing to stay on until 1:05 instead of 1 p.m.? In other words, another 10 minutes instead of 5 minutes. So we could just do a time check and see how much time you're willing to stay on. Would it be okay to stay on for an extra 5 minutes? Both of you?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
maybe. And okay, great. So Adam asked, what are the ways that we can actively engage with different communities without falling into the tokenism trap? Sometimes I feel that by actively drawing in different groups in order to expand the conversation, I end up forcing a particular identity on someone and forcing them to speak on behalf of that group. So how to not fall in the tokenism trap?
So should I, Natalie, do I go ahead?
Sure, yes.
Okay. So that I've been drawing different groups. Well, that's a great question, and I think that's a lot of what many of us have experienced, either as on different sides, either as being an organizer or participating in something. I think it's about your approach. So, is there representation in terms of whoever you want to whoever you want to speak with? Are you coming from a place of you really want to have that intersectional analysis? And I see there's a question here on political stance. I'd love to answer that as well, Whitney, but maybe I could continue the conversation with you another time. But for me, it's really about your approach. Not just oh, I need to get this done, and this needs to be a queer Black girl because of this and this. It's more what is my framework? Where am I coming from? Who am I intending to target, and why? And so when you ask those questions, you could often find yourself okay, so I'm coming for the need of just a project or just for the funding or whatsoever, then maybe I should step down. There's lots of moments where I think I've been asked to do things, and I know purely it was just for the exoticization of my identity. And at some moments I did it, even if I knew in my gut it was not a right thing to do. No, it wasn't coming from a social justice or what I'd say an anti-oppression space. So it's also about your identity and how you do it as well, right? It's the complexities of these terms that we're talking about of colonization. So. And if you feel for example, that you might be, you could also delegate. We could ask other people or other communities, other people that you have a network with of you know what, I don't think I'm the right person to do this right now, to ask this person for because of this and this and this, or as a white man or white woman or a straight person, or the list goes on, it doesn't make sense for me to do this. So for me, it's sometimes learning when to, I call it the 3 S's or 4 or 5 S's. It's learning when to step back, and learning knowing when to stand up, and also learning when to shut up. So I'm not sure if I really responded to your question, because I don't think that there's an actual to-do list of how could we never be engaging in tokenism. But I think what I would like to bring that back is to yourself or your community group or space, organization, wherever you're coming from, and say, what is the intention in what we're doing? And then once you break it down, I think that's how tokenism could be avoided.
I would like to add just one more point to that, everything Barry said, but and also when you're asking people to speak out, or when you yourself are speaking out, that you make it intentional to name it, or to go over with the person that you've invited to speak, that they are there to speak out about their own experience and what they've lived, and not in representation or on behalf of whatever group, a larger group.
Thanks for that, and I think that also addresses Emmanuel Perez Cohen's question. I had a very similar question. There's a question from Natalie Doyle. What is the role of empowerment in some of your stories as facilitators, organizers, but also for the people you work with? Do you want me to?
I think for me the role of empowerment is in being very transparent with the people that I'm working with. So in this case, with the youth that I'm working with, about where I'm at, what things I can afford to risk or to do, and what things I cannot. But so for me, the role of empowerment is in really making up a space where people can make decisions. So where if I'm asking somebody, for example, come to a presentation, can you come to this presentation, that I am being very transparent about what type of presentation it is, what kinds of people are going to be in the room, what kinds of questions might they be asked, and opening up the space to say, but you don't have to do it. And if you really don't want to do it, like, think about it. You don't have to answer now. So really, I think it's all about your own relationship with that person. I also don't think there is a step-by-step guide, but that's what I tend to do, depending on the person whom I'm dealing with. I really want the final decision to really come down to them, and not to come down to them because they feel obliged to please me, or to say yes because I asked. And then I should also say that sometimes I'm really careful to go back to whoever, my director, my manager, whoever who is asking me to bring in forward, for example, a youth, when I feel like the event is not going to be great and is going to be very tokenistic, that I say, I don't think I can ask the youth to go do this. Can you ask them directly? And then support that youth in responding to whoever is asking them. I don't know if that was clear.
I think it was clear, and a lot of people are sending in the chat messages to acknowledge that as well. And I see that we're already 2 minutes after 1 p.m. So I did want to give you a chance to say your last words for today. But before doing so, just want to thank everyone for attending the webinar, and especially to Valerie and Natalie for accepting to present as two of the co-authors of the Decolonizing Social Justice Work publication. I put up on the screen the links where people can download. It is a free resource, and it's available on the Girls Action website, and it's available in both English and French. So the links are up on your screen. And then also just to let you know that there are other Girls Action webinars that will be coming up later this month that you might want to check out. And I think there is such a great interest in this webinar, so maybe Waridi and Natalie might be interested in coming back to do another one, and maybe we can find a format that you would like better, or that you think that that will work better for some of these discussions. So I'm going to pass things on to you to see if you have any last words to close this session.
Well, thank you for sharing your energies in such a limited way. Just quickly, it's going to be there's a question from Emmanuel Paris Cohen, and so the question quick is, do you feel it's ever appropriate for someone who doesn't share the same identity, specific group struggles, oppression, to facilitate, coordinate an initiative that speaks da-da-da-da-da? Everybody could see the question. If it's ever appropriate, I don't know. I feel a lot of the time it's not, and I get a lot of eyebrows raised when people respond to me that way, because I just say no. Like, no, I will not facilitate that. It's inappropriate. Oh no, I will not be into that space. However, it's impossible for all of us to share the exact similar identity or oppression. So it's very complex. But then if you're an ally to the work, then there's a part of you that should know when to step down and say, hey, I'm using too much of my power here, and this is going to be a negative of my power, which is not a positive power, because power does not always have to be negative. But in that situation, it's just being really critical within yourself and accepting when your role might be more damaging than anything else. So sorry for taking extra time, but there's so many fruitful questions, so I would be open for a follow-up in a way that's really more interactive, where it's not just about Natalie and I hearing the sounds of our voice. And so just thank you all. And there's a few people, Shimbi, Whitney, Monica, etc., that I'd love to follow up with. So I don't know how that could happen, but do send me an email at wariri@girlsactionfoundation.ca, WARIRI, and maybe we could find a follow-up to this. And yes, there's lots of stories. Our stories are not just us basically, complaining and ranting. There's some of that, and anger could be fruitful, but there's a lot of insights and learning. So we are also coming from an empowered place, and for a lot of us, doing this was a form of empowerment and somewhat self-therapy as well.
Natalie has also put her email address up in the chat box, so natalie.lozano.neda@gmail.com. Thanks so much, everyone, for your enthusiasm, and thanks especially to both of you, Wariri and Natalie, and have a great day.
Thank you all.